So we're going to be continuing to look at the functions of an operating system in this video. Now, a recap from last time, these were the main functions we talked about. And in the first video, we talked about device drivers and user interfaces. In this video, we'll look at multitasking, file and disk management, and the use of system security and user accounts. So before we talk about multitasking, it's important to remember this idea of the fetch, decode, execute cycle that we looked at inside the CPU. So the CPU is fetching instructions from RAM, taking them back to decode and execute. Now a CPU can only do one instruction at a time, but it can do it can execute billions of instructions per second. And that is what allows this idea of multitasking to happen. So the reality is, like we covered in the first topic, values will be passed between the different registers, any processing, any kind of calculations will occur. That can only happen one at a time, just very fast. So if our CPU can only deal with one instruction at a time, how come I can have antivirus running at the same time as my spreadsheet open and I've got BBC News on? This is down to the operating system. Now, through use of memory management and CPU time, it allows you as the user to run multiple applications. So when you open a program, so say we open Microsoft Word, the operating system will move any parts that we're using to memory, and then as we're using extra bits, so say we start inserting shapes, that part will then be moved into RAM. Now, if we start opening multiple programs, which we do most of the time, the operating system has to make sure they don't interfere with each other or we don't accidentally overwrite something by keeping everything separate in RAM. So if locations 1 to 10 in RAM are being used with Microsoft Word, and then we open a spreadsheet, the operating system will make sure that the spreadsheet is not opened into any of those locations 1 to 10 that we're using with Word. Okay, now, the CPU can only process one application at a time. So even if you've got 7 tabs open at the bottom of your screen right now, unless you've got multiple cores, your CPU is only going to be doing one thing at a time. The operating system gives us the illusion that the computer's doing multiple things by dividing the CPU time. So it will say, right, I want you to do 5 FDE cycles on that Microsoft Word document. And then I want you to do 5 FDE cycles on the spreadsheet. And then I want you to do 5 FDE cycles on the antivirus. Now remember, because the CPU does billions of FDE cycles per second, we won't notice that that is occurring. Finally, as if this wasn't enough, the operating system also organizes any movement of data to or from virtual memory. So remember, if RAM is full, we don't want the computer to say, no, you can't open anything else. So we use a part of our secondary storage as virtual memory, and we move the bits we're not using there. The operating system will make sure that happens correctly. So, as if multitasking wasn't enough, the operating system is also responsible for our file and disk management. Now, this is the simple stuff like adding a new folder, copying the contents from one area to another, renaming a document, deleting work that we no longer need. So, in terms of file management, it's all the stuff that we're used to doing. Okay, anything to do with moving, editing, and deleting files. The OS is responsible for that. It is also responsible for the actual hard disk. So imagine this is our hard disk drive up here. You can see it's split into sectors. Now, the OS will decide what gets saved where. Now, ideally, you'd save all parts of a file together. Now, when we come on to disk defragmentation, we'll talk about why that doesn't always occur, how we can make it more efficient. But essentially, the operating system decides exactly where your file is going to be saved onto your hard drive. Okay, and then, like we say, if we say, I want you to defrag my disk, it will then organize that to make your disk more efficient. But we will look at that in more detail later on. Lastly, We've looked at user accounts quite a lot, particularly when we talked about system security. Now, if your operating system is single user, you can only have one person on that computer at once accessing those files. That's fine if it's your home computer, but what if it's HSBC's financial database and you want to get some of your cash out? You will need a multi-user operating system where many users can access the computer at the same time. So things like cash machines, travel agents, databases, anything where multiple people will need the same information at the same time. And a nice easy bit to finish, nice on our brains. User account controls. The operating system allows you to control who can access what. So if we think about the school example, a school would have a student account and the students would be able to access particular bits of the drives, like students shared in their own area. You're then going to have a staff account, which would allow access to the staff drives and the student drives. And then lastly, this is mainly going to be on your phone or your tablets, but anti-theft measures can be put into place on devices, like using your fingerprint to unlock your screen or using passwords, that kind of thing. Now again, we're going to finish on some questions, so pause the video here and complete the questions and make sure your booklet is up to date.